he set up the Somali Affairs Unit at the State Department, I think.
At
the embassy in Nairobi, yes. Which eventually evolved into U.S. mission to Somalia. In 2001, when he served as a U.S. embassy in the Salvage, he visited Unda, northern Somalia. Perhaps back in 2001, I was less than 10 years old. So I think everyone here knows and has really good understanding of the ambassador's background. So now we're going to talk of our discussion in U.S. Africa policy under President Biden's administration. As you all are aware of, there has been a peace summit in Washington, D.C., which is attended by most of our bigger leaders, including our own president, the Sheikh, who's there. And I think we want to hear from His Excellency, the Ambassador, on what are the priorities for President Biden's administration in engaging in Africa, and the outcomes of that summit. So, without further ado, I wanted to have the Ambassador speak at the podium.
Very good. I'll go to the podium in a moment. I wanted to first recognize two of my teachers who are here. Yasir is one of them. We first met in Minneapolis, but we had met online before then. And Yasir tells me when he agrees with me, and Yasir tells me when he disagrees with me. That's the relationship that we have. I appreciate his intelligence, his commitment to Somalia's brighter future, and his analytical skills and the standing that he has in his generation of Somalia's leaders.
Thank you so much.
There's another gentleman in this room who I met very soon after I arrived and gave me a great introduction to Somalia, taught me a lot about the media landscape here, and that is my friend and teacher, Abdullah.
The floor is yours.
I'll mention two of my colleagues who are here with me. Anne Netterling is our Economic and Political Affairs Officer. The role of an ambassador is that we organize the embassy and we keep the general policies going, but often we are very broad and very shallow. So when I ask a question that requires a deeper, more detailed response, then Anne is going to give me my cheat sheet that will give me some of those details. And Alidor Bosch, you could stand. Some of you know Alidor already, and many of you know that our U.S. mission in Somalia is divided into the embassy here in Mogadishu and our U.S. mission Somalia Nairobi office, which is at the compound of U.S. Embassy Nairobi. And there we have our American colleagues, and we have our locally recruited colleagues, such as Alidor, who are different nationalities, mostly Kenyan, and different ethnicities, mostly ethnic Somalis. And that would describe my colleague Ali Noor. So I've asked him to take photos. So Yasir asked me to keep my opening remarks under 3 hours. But I really do want to have more time for questions and answers. And ask me anything. I may not answer everything, but you can ask me whatever you want. Thank you to the Mogadishu Institute for Research and Policy Studies, a newborn baby in the world of think tanks and civil society here in Somalia. And I said, The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit focused on our partnership with African nations and the African people from all across the continent. The last time that we held such an event was under President Obama in 2014. So it was 8 years, and one of the common things that we heard from African leaders is, please don't wait another 8 years to do this. But it depends on the administration. The Obama administration gave a high priority to relations with this continent, as does the Biden administration. So President Biden has made clear that he believes in
Okay. Believes in U.S. collaboration with African leaders, as well as civil society, business, the African communities, African immigrant communities across the United States, women and youth leaders. That's all essential to sharing the challenges that promote the best interests of Africans and Americans. I mean, the American government was set up to promote our interests, our American interests. But we see that there's a lot of shared interests we have with many countries in Africa and African peoples. So there isn't necessarily a conflict between our taxpayers paying me to promote U.S. interests and also promoting Somalia interests because of the shared interests. Now, I can't say that with every single African leader on the continent we have shared interests, because in some cases we don't. But with the African peoples, yes. We want this continent to be successful, and we see that a brighter future for Africa, a brighter future that puts Africa at the center of relations amongst all societies on this planet, serves our own interests as well. So I want to be clear about that. Have any of you seen the op-ed that I put out recently that was on Galway Online, Huron Online? Go Joke? Yeah, Go Joke. Yeah, I try to make that point there, that there's no shame in saying that I'm here to promote my country's interests, just as the Somalia embassy in Washington, D.C. is there to promote Somalia's interests. But there's no conflict because our interests coincide to a very, very great extent. This is, in our view, a historic moment in Somalia. It has historic challenges and historic opportunities. One of my friends in your government describes this government as the government of Abaraha iyo Amiga. I hope, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it so badly you can't understand what I'm saying, but Abaraha iyo Amiga. Yeah. Right, yeah. Yeah. So drought and security. Yeah. Sorry for doing damage to your language. Yeah. I must confess I haven't worked sufficiently on learning my Somali. That'll be my second year. So more than 100 communities, including some important towns, have been liberated from the violence and extortion of the Al-Shabaab network. Was this due to the Americans or the African Union contingents? No, this was initiated by the Somalis, initially by the communities themselves, and then supported by the Somali National Army, initiated, organized, led, fought. We have played a supporting role. Our Turkish friends have played a supporting role. The African Union, especially the Ugandan contingent, has played a supporting role, but only a supporting role. This has been a very successful endeavor of the Somali security forces. And then a major challenge. More than 1 million persons have been displaced, and close to 7 million people, by our estimate, are suffering supreme and even life-threatening deprivation from the worst drought ever. We can find nothing in the historical record that shows a drought this severe and this long, and that has produced immense human suffering. The American people last calendar year contributed $1.3 billion in relief. 90% of that, 90%, is in the form of cash grants. That goes directly from our treasury to heads of households in the most severely afflicted areas of the country. It doesn't pass through others. Now, there's an initial process where the humanitarian workers will go to all of the households in the most severely afflicted regions of the country as far as suffering from the effects of the drought, register how many people are in the household, who is the head of household, and get their phone number for phone transfers of these cash grants. This is something that we have learned over time. The most efficient way of responding to the humanitarian needs brought on by a drought or other natural disaster is through the market. So you get people the resources so that they can get from what they need, and the market delivers. Now, there are some areas of the country where the market cannot deliver. There is no food to be found at any price. In those areas, there's the old-fashioned idea of delivering food. That is taking place in those areas. But as I said, 90% is cash grants. In addition to what we call resiliency programs, and that's sinking new boreholes and doing other activities that would hopefully make the communities more resilient to these droughts. And we are noticing that the time of recovery between droughts is shrinking. The frequency of the droughts is increasing. I am not a climate scientist, but that would tell me that climate change is especially affecting the Horn of Africa. We, I believe all of you, have all of you been given the gold cards? Yeah, everyone has that? Okay, I think you have the English one. We actually have a Somali one as well. But you will see 3 sets of goals. The first one is security, increasing security for Americans and Somalis. The second one is both the humanitarian response to the drought and promoting inclusive economic growth. Somalia has made great progress in the highly indebted countries process to get debt relief, getting closer and closer to that completion point in which you'll see considerably more resources being accessible to the Somali government. So we are doing our part with our representation on international financial institutions and in other ways in promoting that outcome of successful HIPC completion, and giving our advice for consideration by the country's leadership on other economic reforms. And there's quite a number. Actually, there's a lot of pending legislation, and many of you know about this, across all the sectors that has been pending in Parliament, but including some important economic reforms. And then the last area is governance issues. The governance issues are Somali issues, but I will explain the kinds of things that we do, and you can judge whether that's appropriate or not. We have no opinion, that we, the U.S. government, has no opinion on what the content
of Somali federalism should be. That's a Somali discussion. However, we strongly recommend, as a friend of Somalia, as an international partner, that Somali leaders at state and at federal levels develop a national consensus on whatever that federalism should be. The provisional constitution is now 10 years old, and that national consensus then be enshrined in the final constitution, and all of the processes agreed on how that final constitution gets ratified, be observed, so that the Somali people can be delivered predictable governance. People know what to expect. People know what the roles and responsibilities are, who is in charge of what. That would be a big advance in stabilization and on the road to full recovery, full revival of the nation, which is the desired outcome of all of these efforts. So again, the content is none of our business, but we do specific things to support the process, and also on the more local level, funding reconciliation efforts and things of that sort. Also, with the newly liberated communities, we are a major player in stabilization. What does that mean? As Al-Shabaab, whenever they have the opportunity, will destroy the essential infrastructure of communities that they have dominated while they are fleeing in front of the Somali security forces, but they will take the time to destroy the essential infrastructure. So with the well poisoned and the borehole destroyed, the initial stabilization is just trucking in water and other essential supplies. Then things like a mobile clinic before a permanent clinic can be constructed, a military court before a civilian court can be set up, but so you can immediately start providing a way for people to settle their differences, and of course schools. That's one of our areas that we are very involved in, is rehabilitating classrooms, building schools, and funding teachers and so forth. So that's on the stabilization side. Often people use the word stabilization, and it's not clear what are the actual deliverables, and that's the kind of things that we mean by that. And there are other international partners that are doing this, and an essential aspect of how we do this is that we resource district and federal officials. These communities have been having to deal with Al-Shabaab officials for a long time. And now they need to get to know the legitimate district, state, federal officials. And it would just confuse them to see a bunch of foreigners in the mix. So we resource for the Somali officials to deliver. And I have given the order, and every evidence that I have says that it is being obeyed, that we stay in the background. We do the resourcing. We have an office in Beledweyne. We have an office in Johar, so we try to get close to the area, but we resource and leave the delivery to the Somali officials, because that is part of building the relationships with these communities and the legitimate authorities. So in general, for the African Leader Conference, the White House's intent is to promote robust partnerships between the United States and African nations, including Somalia, as vital to the promotion of our shared priorities. When it comes down to Somalia, as I said, it's bringing security to the Somali people, broad-based economic opportunity, revitalizing the Somali governance and democracy, delivering services, strengthening a free and open international order. And I must say that this is something that we have noticed, that in international fora, Somalia has voted at key moments based on principle, knowing that there would be diplomatic costs. Has put principle first. In a key vote on the interests of the Uyghur people in China, and a key vote on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Somali authorities were fully aware, as there was intense pressure by the People's Republic of China and by the Russian Federation on both of those votes, and opted to vote on principle rather than short-term interest. When we talk about shared interests, we also look to see with which countries do we have shared values. And that we didn't see any material benefit on those votes. We saw an expression of the values of the Somali people. I've gone on longer than I intended, but I welcome your questions. If you don't mind, I think I'm going to sit down and take the questions. And then if Anne has to slip me some details, then she's closer to me and can do so.
Thank you, Ambassador Andrea, for wonderful remarks of the U.S. Africa Summit and also U.S. policy here in Somalia. I'll say a few remarks that I said earlier in Somali so that people that came right now have an understanding of what we're talking about. Assalamu alaikum. هداكي بدأوا حاجة كلمة علي وأنا لسه عندي مرحلة الموضوع بسمسين هاي هذا هذا أنا بقى سؤال بقى جالس وعاء محمد وعاء سنة معك أساسا هاي معك سنة تمويل عيسى والريسيرش والبوليس تسألها وعاء الدكتور أو ميس استسالة وكان لا يجيتنس معك مفهوم سنين هاي دولا إن شاء الله وعلى ما يوم العليو بريمير بانك نوصل جلسة كون كان صعب هذا سبونسر جلسة هذا أوسع بنا ما كلا أوسع بنا thank you بريمير بانك دولا إن شاء الله حتى سؤالي هذا follow up questions اللي بديدوها كده بدي كده بدونا سؤال بديدونا speak إن شاء الله. So now I move to the next step and just I'll ask follow-up questions. And then I will open up the questions to the audience so they can ask you questions. My first question is, as you are aware of, President Biden has announced that his administration will invest $55 billion in the continent in the next 3 years. What factors will determine which countries will receive these investments and what criteria?
Well, as the U.S. ambassador to Somalia, I want all $55 billion. That is absolutely the case. We do see that Africa is the future. We have seen that Africa's contribution to world GDP is now 3%. That doesn't sound like much. It isn't all that much. But only 10 years ago, it was 2%. So that's half again as great as it was. We see, I first came to Africa in 1983. So this is my 40-year anniversary working on this continent. I have seen tremendous change for the better in many places, both in terms of economic development and in terms of governance, democratic development, presence, the greater prominence and presence in world culture, world society, world events. So we believe that trend will continue, and that is why the president is wanting to increase our direct investment as a government in the future of this continent. And this $55 billion investment, we are still waiting to see exactly how it's going to play out. but this partnership is to extend in multiple sectors, meaning business, technology, health systems, food security, climate adaptation, democracy, human rights, peace and security, good governance, and so forth. We are funding programs and ideas proposed by Africans, rather than the American come in and say, I know better than you, this is what you need. No, it's going to be receiving proposals, and if something makes sense to us, we're not going to be funding it. But the origin would be with African partners, and that if we say, yes, that is something that fits our criteria for the types of things we want to fund, and we see the ability of this organization to carry it out and achieve the desired outcome, then that's what it will be. The funding has been announced. Let's say the structure of how it's going to be implemented is a work in progress, but our engagement will be different in each country. Again, frankly, there are countries where we have a true partnership with the government, including with the government across administrations, across both African administrations and across American administrations, and countries where our partnership is more with the people than with the government. You know, I'll be a good enough diplomat and not specify which of those countries I'm talking about, but that does exist, where our aid goes through civil society and not through government. There aren't many of those, but there are a few, and if you made a short list of them, you would probably right. You would probably guess right. Really good news for this effort. You know, this is a great announcement. Will actually come to anything? Well, President Biden announced that Ambassador Johnny Carson, one of my mentors and one of the finest human beings I have ever known, will be the overall in charge for this program. He is an Africa specialist. Like me, he came to the continent initially as a Peace Corps volunteer. Tanzania, if I remember right, Tanganyika when he got there. He was ambassador in Zimbabwe, Uganda, Kenya. He was our highest diplomat for Africa, as our Assistant Secretary for African Affairs. And he retired from the State Department. He's now with the United States Institute for Peace. And Ambassador Biden brought him back and gave him this heavy responsibility so that it's not just an announcement, but it actually turns into real results to promote the advancement of this continent. And so I'm very eager to see what Ambassador Carson is going to do with this. When I am next in DC, he and I are in regular contact. As I said, he's a mentor of mine, and I will be very interested to see what he does with it. Another, when I said that our engagement will be different with each country, that means, as I said, in a few countries it'll be more through civil society than through government, but in the case of Somalia, it will be both, because we do have good cooperative relations with the government here, both at the federal and state levels. And when I say state levels, that's inclusive of Somalia. We do humanitarian development and security work there, as we do with federal member states. All of our programs across Somalia are briefed to the federal government. I'll say it again, across historic Somalia. Yeah. So there's never any surprise in Mogadishu. The Americans are doing what? Where? No, there's no surprises. We always inform.
Okay, I'll use this one. And that gets me to my second question. what do you say to the political analysts and political pundits who argue that Americans' perception of Africa is outdated and it has not taken into consideration of progress Africa has been made in the last few decades, and only views Africa as taking case, sees Africa through corruption and whatnot and conflict.
Yes, for the vast majority of the American people, that is the case. Tragic but true, when you say Somalia, for the vast majority of Americans, they think of the 1990s. That's not fair, that's not right, that's not accurate, but it's true. And in this world, perception moves the world more than objective reality does. I wish that wasn't true. I wish that we, as humans, have arrived at maturity where we can look at things and make judgments on an objective basis, but we tend not to. I've heard it said that what distinguishes humans from the animals is that we are rational. In my experience, humans are very rarely rational, and then only for brief moments. Very rarely rational, and then only for brief moments. It's not really characteristic of us. But yes, what you said is true. It's not, my 30-year-old daughter who grew up in Africa, is married to a Kenyan. It's not true for her. The bumper sticker on her car is Africa is the future. Myself, I'm 62 years old and I spent 40 years of my life in Africa. I know it's not true. But part of this, frankly, is the media's fault, my friend. Because the media has a bias towards the sensational. And a banner headline of things are improving in country X has a rising GDP and its social and health data is getting better and better. That doesn't sell media. So there tends to be a focus on bad news. Now, domestically, it's the same thing. The domestic stories that lead in the media are also bad news stories. I served in Sierra Leone, in West Africa, during the war and right after the war, and I was witness to the very depth of that terribly violent, brutal conflict. And I was witness as they quickly recovered once peace was restored. It was amazing how quickly they recovered. Well, the extreme violence of that conflict was in all the world's media. It was very sensational. The brutality was quite horrific, and that we got in all the media. Their rise, rapid rise, after peace was restored, very seldom mentioned. Here in Somalia, the attack on Villa Rosa, the attack on the education ministry, the attack on the Hyatt Hotel, the Beledweyne bombing, recently the Mahas bombing, those get in the world media. It took months before the successful Somali security forces offensive against al-Shabaab got in the international media. And I was complaining about this. I was calling to my Africa media friends and saying, what's going on here? And finally, one journalist got a story out, and she's an old friend I've known for a long time. And then there were 4 or 5 others, international media, that began finally to talk about the good news of communities being freed from al-Shabaab violence and extortion. But it took a while to where they didn't wait at all before they reported these high-profile attacks. I may have gone off the subject, I'm not sure.
No, I think you're good.
But yes, there is an education, an American education issue here, and Americans who know Africa as a continent, Americans who know Somalia, are working on that. And I'd have to say that the ethnic Somali American community in Minneapolis, in Columbus, in Fargo, are doing more and more to acquaint their fellow Americans with Somalia's rise. One thing that I've encouraged the leaders of the ethnic Somali American community to do is to work on a national organization that would further the efforts of this important American community to correct the record and to teach their fellow Americans about the reality here. There isn't really a national organization right now. There tends to be local organizations.
Yes, and I have a follow-up question on that, on what you said, that it seems that you indicated that the media has a responsibility on promoting positive perception of Africa, but also as ambassadors, as diplomats, do you you have more influence than the media does. So do you take responsibility, like as an American ambassador, as an American diplomat who's long served the African continent, for not positively reporting back to the State Department, to your government, informing them of new realities that have emerged in Africa? It's not just the media, but it's also we sort of feel the diplomats are are not doing what they're supposed to do, like at least enough of what they could.
Well, I will say yes and no to that. The primary responsibility for educating the American people about Somalia reality lies with my friends at Somalia's embassy. They tell Somalia's story, we tell America's story. But that said, I said primary, I didn't say it's none of our business at all. And we realize there's always resource issues. Yeah, we're aware of that. But I know that when I went to Minneapolis for Somalia Week, Ambassador Sharif Ali was there with me on stage and had a lot of media engagements trying to use that big event as a platform to tell Somalia's story. I have spoken to many audiences in the United States throughout my career, including since I've been here as ambassador to Somalia, and I've always made this point, that while there are some countries on the continent that are in crisis, there have been some countries that have been in crisis for a long time. South Sudan, another country I spend a lot of time in, is one of them that comes to mind. But there's also a lot of positive stories and countries that have made tremendous progress over the decades. I had dinner last night with Anita Kikigbeho, the current leader of the United Nations in Somalia. She is from Ghana. And she and I were talking about my recollection of Ghana in the early 80s. That it was at its lowest point. People spent all their time just looking for anything to eat. The society had really collapsed. And over the last 40 years, they have made a stunning amount of progress across all of the economic and social indicators. That's not well known internationally. And they're not the only one. I cite Ghana because of the discussion I had last night with Kiki Gbeho. But you could cite a number of African countries around each region that has had that sort of success. Frankly, Somalia has made progress towards regaining the economic and social indicators it had over 30 years ago. I wish that wasn't true, but to speak frankly and objectively, that is the case. You're not yet at the heights that you previously were. But by building a strong base now, economically, in terms of governance, in terms of your education foundations across the board, then you will blow past your former height and keep going. That is, when I talk about the full revival of Somalia, that's what I'm talking about.
Because why do I believe that's possible? Because I have seen the evidence in the ethnic Somali communities around the planet. How many different countries have the ethnic Somali communities prospered and done spectacularly well with the genius and energy, ingenuity, entrepreneurship that this community, this culture is known for. So if it can be done in Sydney, Australia, and it can be done in Fargo, I forget which Dakota that is, north or south, but and in the Nordic countries and all around the world, it can be done at home. And so that is why I'm expecting Somalia to take its rightful place as a leader in East Africa. Yeah.
I have about 4 questions, but I hear people want to ask questions. So I would only ask 2 of those 4 questions that I had and let other people ask questions so I don't take their time. I'm interested, Excellency, as you're aware of, China's engagement in Africa witnessed exponential growth in the last 20 years. And while the U.S. engagement in Africa flatlined, what are the reasons to that, and what can the U.S. do differently in the next decade or so to ensure that that it deepens the partnership with African countries?
Sure. Our relationship with China is complicated. And so let me explain some things about that. The Chinese and U.S. economies are very intertwined. China is a competitor, and people will say, that's because you are a world power and you want to prevent another world power from rising. We don't have a problem with another world power rising if it is a world power that wants to see the world managed in an open, transparent, fair manner. We don't want to see a closed system. We don't want to see a frankly dictatorial system. We want to keep it and make it more open than it already is. I mean, the composition of the UN Security Council, our president is on record saying that needs to be reformed. And I think a lot of Africans agree with that. So that's the kind of thing that we want to see, is greater advancement of the world system towards greater legitimacy, credibility, functionality. And we see some countries promoting a better world system and others wanting to channel it in what we consider to be negative ways. So our competition is based on that. I'd say in my 40 years, I've seen 2 countries significantly expand their diplomatic presence in Africa. Now, China has been involved in some countries in Africa from the era of independence onwards, less so in other countries. But over the last 40 years of my own personal experience in Africa, I've seen a lot more African presence of China, both diplomatically and in its businesses, and Turkey. Turkey is the other one. But the number of Turkish embassies in Africa has expanded very, very greatly. Turkey's presence on the world stage has expanded very greatly. You don't hear of the U.S. Considering Turkey to be a strategic competitor or something like that, but they're rising also. Why you not hear about the U.S. Considering Turkey a competitor? Because Turkey largely is looking for the same open world system that we do. So it doesn't threaten an open international system. It has its own. I can't say that everything that Turkey wants and everything the Americans want is exactly the same. It's not. but we've been friends and allies for a very, very long time, and we have no problem talking about our differences. Like when I was talking about my teacher Yasir, there are things we agree on, things we don't agree on, but we remain friends. That is certainly that describes better our relationship with Turkey than it does our relationship with China. We recognize that African governments and people are able to make their own decisions. You know, we are, as Americans, aren't going to say don't do business with China, because we do business with China. We do a lot of business with China. But we're saying, and we can point to examples, be careful. Here are some specific examples around the world where deals were done that had bad outcomes for the countries concerned. So we're just saying keep your eyes open. But African people, African governments have the ability to make their own decisions. My previous assignment was in Djibouti. The Djiboutian government made its decision that the 100-year-old, rather decrepit railway that the French had built, that was a lifeline to their economy. 85% of the Djiboutian economy is derived from servicing trade in and out of Ethiopia. So that train link that makes the port of Djibouti so competitive with other ports on the Indian Ocean, Gulf of Aden, was vital, and it was falling apart. Djibouti went to its traditional partners. No one was interested in financing a new railway. China was. So they got this new railway, and now they've been haggling about the interest payments and so forth ever since. I know the Djiboutians, they will be very capable of defending their own interests, as they did with previous important partners, France, the UAE, Dubai Ports World, and so forth. So I believe that African peoples, African governments will be able to make their own decisions and come out ahead. But I wanted to explain the nature of our competition, why we compete with China, and why China competes with us. And it's because we have a different vision as to how international relations and the world economy should be conducted.
Thank you. I'll ask the last question, until, then we're going to open up questions for the audience. My last question is, due to its geostrategic importance, so there has been growing trend of foreign competition for influence in Somalia. If not wisely mitigated, this geopolitical competition could have negative repercussions on Somalia, on Somalia's stability as well. So, what as U.S. as the largest donor to Somalia, what's your view and what's your government's view on how those foreign influence be mitigated and these geopolitical competitions?
I can keep this answer shorter than my others because a lot of it aligns with what I just said about China. But I'll refer back to something I said about how we conduct business. We work at the state and local level, the federal member states and Somaliland, and at the federal level. But we keep the federal authorities aware of everything we do everywhere. And I'm going to be a good diplomat here and not name names, but you will all know who I'm talking about. Some of your international partners have tended to bring resources to bear without going through the federal authorities and at times on an individual basis rather than through civil society and government and so forth. That is unhelpful. It's not. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be open, and it needs to be coordinated with the legitimate authorities of the Somali people through their government. Now, I just said earlier that there are some places in the world where we work through civil society more than through government. There aren't that many on the continent, but there are a few like that. That is as a last resort when, for various reasons, we really can't find people in government that we consider to be the legitimate representatives of the population. And you can think of some of those countries, and where our experience of funding through the government consistently produces bad results. And so we go through civil society. But those are the exceptions for us. And even with those instances, we keep the government informed. They don't like it, but that we don't work through them. But we always let them know. And I can say this with authority because I've been at some of those countries. Again, there are not many, but there are a few. But our standard is to coordinate and work through government in a transparent, open manner. And some of the partners are not doing that. I believe that they're better now than they used to be, and I'm hoping that they will keep that trend and come in line with the major donors for Somalia's revival.
Excellent. Now I'll open up the questions to the audience. I just wanted to lay out the rules for questions. I would expect all of you to be very kind and respectful in asking your questions, and I would also ask everyone to keep under one question and ask two questions. I initially wanted to give you guys the opportunity to ask two questions, but due to time, I think we're going to have everyone ask only one question. And please keep it brief. I'll start with the Member of Parliament, Ahmed Koshin. I think he has a question.
I don't know how long you have the whole. I can see it.
Okay.
It's for you to decide.
Thank you.
waxaan salaamayaa Mogadishu Institute iyo ambassadorka inoo yimi inoo sharaxay the relationship between the US and African continents. Ambassador, we greatly appreciate for your input and suggestions and thoughts on the provision of US-Africa policy, what's on the table, keeping past history in mind, particularly in Africa, which has been used as an arena of influence, domination, and resource extraction by greater powers, which has devastated the African population from one country to the other. Africa, with its fastest growing population, largest free trade area, most diverse ecosystem, and one of the largest groups of the UN in general, needs to be taken very seriously when discussing at the table when it comes to international affairs. Without them, much of this will never have been possible. My question, Ambassador, is that you have stated in your initial beginning that the agenda of African states has only been considered in the United States for 2014. That was the first time, and the second time was 2022. Both of them were democratic presidential winners that, in fact, undertook those policies. Recently, $53 billion has been pledged to African nations. Majority of those funding is subject to congressional approval. With the change of hands in the Congress, how do you think those programs will effectively be channeled to the right government or programs or institutions? If I may add, that's my question, in fact, but if I may add a little extra to what I sincerely believe is the problems of Africa, is not lack of resources. We have countries that are 70% young population, growing population, diverse 30% of world's natural resources that has never been extracted. All of these things are an advantage for the African continent. What Africa lacks is proper institutions that represent the society, good governance, free and fair elections, respect of human rights, And majority of those countries that have a very good relationship with the United States might also be quite a number of them acting opposite to the values of the United States. So in that sense, the interest of the US outweighs whatever the interest of the nation that those rulers are. So I will suggest, instead of the handouts, Africa requires a proper development, institutional development, and human development on both ends. I'll leave it at that, sir, and I thank you very much for your time today.
Let me hand, there was a lot in there. Let me handle this first.
I think the ambassador is going to answer.
Yeah, I'm going to do one at a time. There's a lot to unpack there. First, let me ask the question and then let me give some responses to other points that were raised. My first response is I would really like to have a good sit-down discussion with you. There's much of what you said I agree with, and some I may not, but I need more clarification. So I look forward to a chance to follow up with you and have a deeper discussion. On the specific question, our system is such that the administration proposes and Congress disposes, decides. There has been the party of President Biden has increased its presence in the Senate, but it has lost its majority in the House. There are some champions of Africa on the Republican side, and the difference between the two parties in our Congress, the lower house, is very, very small. So we will see what happens. I am a lifelong independent, and as that is my own personal conviction. I'm not a member of either party, but also as a diplomat, that is my professional stance as well. But I can just look at that and know that there are champions of Africa on the Republican side, and as you noted, on the Democrat side, they would tend to support the president's policies. You mentioned the youth. One part of what the president is proposing is a more robust funding and continuation of a program that was introduced by President Obama, which is the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, with working with Congress to provide $100 million to that program. Also, and what that does is it expands educational exchange and other programs for dynamic young African leaders from across the continent. The specific areas that this administration wants to work on with young African leaders is expanding digital literacy, so computer literacy, accelerate efforts at greater gender equality, advance transparent governance, including things like e-governance. I know that is something that I just had lunch the other day with the Auditor General. That is one of the things that he's working on, is greater transparency and ease of doing business with government through e-government initiatives. He talked about how Somalis are very familiar with getting banking services, financial services through their phones, but it's not used in government, and that is an initiative that he wants to bring. It's not like it's bringing something that Somali people don't already understand, because they understand it in their banking every day, and increasing economic opportunities. So we talked about security earlier, and I would just say that the violent extortion and the terror attacks of Al-Shabaab is one of the things that most holds back what I would anticipate to be an explosion of a positive explosion of economic opportunity when you unleash the entrepreneurial ability of the proven entrepreneurial ability of the Somali people. But you're held back by a few different things. That is one of them, that insecurity. So let me cut it there and go to the next question. But also, I'm going to make a point that you and I can follow up and have a lengthier conversation if you are willing.
Excellent. In case you want to take notes on the questions for this one.
I think Ann and Ali Noor are doing that for me. So, as the ambassador, I don't have to do any work.
Okay. Yes, I will have. I think the ambassador said that he has a little bit more time to stay with us, so I think I will let everyone ask like 2 questions. But I would really want to keep it brief, and not just add some sort of comments. I will have Honorable Omar Hashi to ask questions now, and then I will get to everybody.
16:15. So let's say 1 o'clock. I don't know how long he has the holiday.
I'll be very brief about it. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone.
I think you need to use the other microphone. Yeah, try to use that microphone.
After Makwala. I think Yasir about Trijumaya. Good afternoon, everyone. My question, I think, is very brief, and my colleague Koshin has touched a bit. But first of all, I want to thank Mogadishu Institute.
Excuse me. والله هي سقف الواسيرة في السؤال اللي هو يديه سفير وقت وهاي وراي وجو بدك تسمع قفز وسوغاري دونتا هي أفتكر سنوها قفز وسوغاري دونتا بلوي سفير وقت وهاي he's going to stay with us so he has a time so we'll get to everybody please let us hear from him first Omar Hashi we'll get to everyone.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your time, and I also appreciate Mogadishu Institute for organizing this forum. I think it was very vital for us to understand US-Africa summit outcomes, and we hope we will have Africa summit with the US soon as a united African states come together and do a similar to advance their interests as well. That is our what we envision. Just to come to my question is, this is the second time we can see this kind of summit, and we know US has had partnership with Africa for quite long. US was supporting Africa, and this unique summit that has been happening recently.
Can you get close to the microphone?
They're not working, so.
Use the other one.
I can hear you.
What I was saying basically is this is very unique summits that has happened different times, 2014 and recently. How is it different than the historical US engagement towards Africa? What do we expect differently from the previous engagement? US has been always a friend, has been a partner to Africa. So we just wanted to understand more why this summit and how is it different from the previous US partnership. And just an add-on, we have seen recently US used to follow through principles, democracy, human rights, rule of law, and in terms of its support towards Africa. But in the recent history, we have seen Africa leaders becoming, developing a big man syndrome. They never respect those principles, and the conditions that used to be leveled against is becoming simplified or becoming weaker. More or less, leaders violates, those kind of principles, but still U.S. and other Western partners continue engaging. Do you have a plan or a different alternative approach to see, supporting vibrant democracies while still having shared interest being advanced within the continent? Thank you.
Three questions will be 2 minutes. Have to take 2 questions. Yeah, I will have member of parliament. Nadra, excuse me. Nadra, she's a member of Somalia's federal parliament. And have her speak.
Okay. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad that we have this opportunity with the Ambassador Larry. As a member of parliament and also as the chairperson for the Social Services Committee and also the deputy chair for Food Security and Nutrition, I got 2 questions. I'm sorry, I'm going to make it 2. The first one is, as we progress towards stabilization under the President Sheikh Hassan, and we see the need for accelerate the debt relief for Somalia to kind of inject economy. And where does America lie? And we say that you inject a lot of money to support us, but specifically to release the debt. Where is this kind of program lies? That's my first question. And my second question is regarding women. Women in Somalia are mostly the breadwinner, but still they don't get a lot of support when it comes to small business or large business. You will notice that in business world in Somalia, mostly is dominated by men. And I think sometimes for women, it's hard to get kind of the support they need, either because of lack of support from the international community to get the skills or the experience they need to kind of engage. So where does the program also lies within the state to support women? We talk a lot about the youth, but sometimes we forget women are the breadwinner, especially in Somalia.
Thank you. And the ambassador will answer those 2 questions, and then
Okay, well, on the first, basically, as I understood, the question was on U.S. engagement with Africa. And it has varied. One style of engagement is this African leaders. That doesn't mean that only 2014 did the United States for Africa. There was different forms of even continent-wide engagement. I believe, I'm going to have to remember exactly when this was, but 15 or so years ago, maybe 20, we established our embassy to the USAU, our embassy to the African Union. That was a new engagement for us, having continent-wide engagement at the primary organizational structure for the entire continent. That was major. That had never been done before. We didn't have that during the OAU period. That began. I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. It must have been around 2005, 2010. Earlier the question was about are the Democrat Party the only one that cares about Africa. I know that in a lot of circles, President George W. Bush who's a Republican, is controversial, but when it came to Africa, he did a lot, especially in promoting health, the PEPFAR program, the malaria program. For a sitting American president, he spent more time in Africa than any other sitting American president. I supported his trip when he came to Tanzania. So I don't want
folks here to have the idea that it's only one side of our political spectrum that has an interest in the continent. You find people who are deeply committed to engagement with the continent on both sides. But there is the idea that it needs to be holistic. It's not only government to government, it's also civil society, it's also business. So we'll continue to see that. On debt relief, we are champions of debt relief. The United States, for Somalia, the United States is the primary equity holder for the international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and so forth. And we have been very active in promoting debt relief, and specific countries that hold Somali debt need to step forward and say that when these conditions are met, they will forgive the debt. That continues to be happening, and we are continuing to champion that. We've done it ourselves. And we see that on the Somali side, steady progress towards reforms and taking all the necessary steps to qualify are being done by the previous government and by the current government. So there has already been important successes, and I would say that the completion point is coming into focus and covers political, economic, and business affairs for us. Did I get any of that wrong, or anything to add, Ann? Yep. Okay. So I would say how is our support for Somali debt relief? How do we actually act on that besides just with words? It's by our vote and our advocacy within the international financial institutions. That's the biggest aspect. And that's frankly where the decisions are made. On the next, I'm probably going to disappoint. Everything you said is accurate and matches our understanding of the business world here. Especially small and medium businesses are female dominated, the big businesses are male dominated. And when I met with, soon after I arrived, I met with the Chamber of Commerce, the Somalia Chamber of Commerce. That was a year ago. I'm trying to remember, but I don't remember that there were any female members, at least not that I met with. The programs that we have, as you said, tend to be more youth-focused. And also some of the marginalized communities. We have some focus there as well. And Alinur, any specific women programs? Oh, please, come.
You can get to the microphone, I think. This one, you can use mine.
On the public diplomacy side, we are doing trainings for women entrepreneurs.
You can take my microphone.
On the public diplomacy side, we are doing trainings for women entrepreneurs. We did a couple of them. We trained women on how to do business, and if they have existing businesses, how to manage them well in terms of bookkeepings and stuff like that. We also do webinars for Somali women business owners as well. So we are actively involved in terms of advocating and also realizing the dreams for Somali women in the business sector. Over.
So I've just learned something new about my own embassy.
Thank you. I think I would have that member of Awais Haji, I think, is a member of Somalia's federal parliament.
كما قال thank you, Mogadishu Institute, and thank you, Ambassador Larry. I'm a Wais Mohammed Omar, member of the Parliament of Somalia and from the Foreign Committee. I want to ask you for your opinion, should Somalia be friends with every country, including the State of Israel? You know, the President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud said that Somali people with peace themselves and Somali friends and peace with the world. Thank you. Short question.
I will have Batula, I think, to ask a question.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك الحميد المجيد waxaan marka hore ku faraxsanahay in aan ka soo qayb galno shirkan qiimaha badan oo muujinaya danta dawladda aan saaxiibka nahay ee Mareykanka iyo dawladdeena Soomaaliya inaan si equal ah uga wada shaqeyno Soomaaliya waxay ku jirtay muddo dheer dagaal sokeeye waxay ku jirtay burbur waxay soo martay dhibaatooyin fara badan qaxooti iyo barakac waxa burburay qaabkii jiritaankeeda iyo dawladnimadeeda waxa soo food saaray marka dib u dhac dhinaca aqoon dhinaca dhaqaalaha iyo siyaasadda waxaan ku faraxsanahay inaan maanta soo gaarnay meeshaan soo gaarnay waxaan u mahadcelinaynaa ambassadorka oo runtii muujiyay haweenka ummadda Soomaaliyeed dareenka uu ka qabo iyo sida ay u arkayso dawladda Mareykanka ee saaxiibka nahay waxaan ku jirnaa dagaal kii hore ka duwan kaasoo culayskiisu uu aad u fara badan yahay waxaan uga mahadcelinaynaa dawladda Mareykanka sida ay noo garab istaagtay haddana ay noo garab taagan tahay diyaarna ay u tahay inay Soomaaliya garab istaagnaato dagaalkaas waxa ka dhashay barakac cusub iyo dhibaatooyin fara badan oo dhinaca fikirka ah barakaca saameynta badan wuxuu ku yeeshay caruur iyo haween fara badan iyo dad rayid ah oo maaragtay si ay ku noolaayeen bas ku noolaa dhibaato ah haddana dhibaatadii ay u sii korortay oo noqday barakac kale waxaan rajaynaynaa marka iyadoo aan marka hore number aad u fara badan oo gaaraya ilaa 2 milyan ay ahaayeen barakac number aad u badan oo gaaraya 2 milyan oo kale ay noqdeen dad abaaraha ku waxyeeloobay haddana number kale ayaa wuxuu ka dhalanayaa barakaca dagaalada aan ku jirno oo aan kula dagaalamayno qawaarijta kuwaasoo aan arxan iyo asxaan midna ummadda Soomaaliyeed u sameeynin inay iska saarto ummadda Soomaaliyeedna ay maanta diyaar u tahay dawlad iyo shacabna ay isgarabsanayaan waxa soo baxay dumar iyo caruur iyo dad maati ah waxay u baahan yihiin in la gaaro gargaar bini'aadanimo waxay u baahan yihiin in la siiyo dib in loo soo nooleeyo dhaqankeedii samaa iyo inay Soomaali yihiin iyo inay dalka leeyihiin iyo caruurta ay wadaan inay tahay mustaqbalkii ummadda Soomaaliyeed qaabkii loo maaragtay wajihi lahaa waxaan rabaa marka ambassadorka ujeedadaydu ma aha su'aal inaan weydiiyo laakiin inaan u baahanahay gacan qabasho ka dhow tan hadda aad noo sheegtay ka degdegsiyo badan aan ku qadarin doono xiriirkeena saaxiibnimo ee ka dhaxeeya labada dal waa mahadsantiin
sorry waa ku darsanayaa waa isku darsanaa hal meel aan ka soconaay Excellency Ambassador Larry, ladies and gentlemen, because of time, I want to shorten, my question or my statement. I second what Madam Batula said about, the families who has been displaced. But I want to add to that, in 2026, Somalia will go to election. And we all know about the woman political participation and the situation that it was in the last election, federal election. The Somali women and women-led organizations need the support of the United States government and the international community. We want to start our advocacy now, not tomorrow, but yesterday. So is there any plan or strategy that your government and your embassy here in Somalia have to support the Somali woman in political participation? Thank you.
All right. Thank you for those statements and questions. On the state of Israel, as I understood the first question, I am aware that the state of Israel has diplomatic relations with some countries in the region. Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan come to mind. South Sudan comes to mind. I am not aware of any discussions with the government of Somalia. I wouldn't necessarily be aware. That would be between those two countries, which are both United Nations member states. So I will leave. I hope that answers the question, but I'm not aware of any such thing. On women in government, let me say a few things about that. Women got the right to participate in U.S. Federal elections 103 years ago. An amendment to our Constitution in 1920. So 103 years ago. We believe that for a country to be successful, it must have structures in place that fairly represent its population. This is an issue that we have struggled with in our own country's history, sometimes violently, with ethnic minorities being denied the right to vote, women being denied the right to vote up until, as I said, 103 years ago, and different other barriers, economic and other, that prevented the representation, the fair representation in our government of all the different components that make up American society. So these issues of fair representation are familiar to us. We want to see Somalia be successful, we want to see Somalia be stable, and we believe fair representation of all of the Somali people, both genders, all the regions, all the different ways that your society, all the different components that make up your society is essential to your success and essential to your stability. I was once acquainted with this image, and I will share it with you because it says a lot. It's an image that always has meant a lot to me. For a bird, think about a bird for a moment. For a bird to fly straight and high, both wings need to be equally strong. If there's one strong wing and one weak wing,
the bird can't fly. It certainly can't fly straight and high. So a bird needs both wings to be strong. And that is true in our view of human societies as well. So that is our basic approach. Also, though, we are aware that we are foreigners. We are foreigners who are partners to the Somali people and their leaders, their government. But we also remind ourselves that as foreigners, there are things that are appropriate and things that are not appropriate, that we need to be careful that we don't get involved in areas that are not our business. So on a general way, and doing things like increasing the ability of women's organizations to amplify their voices, to strengthen women entrepreneurs with skills training, things like that. But we don't want to get directly involved in how Somalis govern their affairs. And it's always an internal debate to make sure that we are representing our values and representing our best advice as foreign friends, but we don't cross that invisible line into getting overly intrusive, overly prescriptive in your affairs. And sometimes we may not go as far as we should, and sometimes we may go too far. That's always a danger. But we are conscious of that, and we try to maintain the appropriate stance. Some of you may have seen the opinion piece that was published online in some of the online media here. I mentioned there something which has the advantage of being true, and some of you have been in my office, you know that. I keep a copy of the Provisional Constitution, and I keep a copy of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations on my desk there, and refer to both those documents regularly. For the humanitarian, yes, with our humanitarian experts, our humanitarian colleagues who have spent their entire careers in different countries on humanitarian issues, they are very much aware that women and children are the most vulnerable part of the population. I was explaining in my opening remarks about how we do humanitarian affairs. I did not mention that amongst the food that we deliver, I said most 90% is through cash grants, but we do deliver a special formulation of very high protein and high nutrition food for severely malnourished children. And that's, some of it is made in the United States, some of it is made in Kenya, and we distribute that to mothers. They just have to open it and feed it, and it's incredible how quickly children can recover with that food. So we are very much aware of the special vulnerabilities. Also, when families are greatly under stress, gender-based violence is on the rise. There's more of that stress results in violence in the household. We are aware of that as well, and work with the appropriate Somali authorities on dealing with that issue. I think I jotted down U.S. engagement, but on the earlier question, but I think it also had to do with democracy. What I will do with that, because I'm very much aware of the time, is I'm going to leave a page on democracy goals with my friend Yasir, who can distribute to folks here, because I think we're just running out of time. Right. But I want to make sure I'm responsive to the questions.
Correct. I think we're running out of time, but I will have, I think Muallimu has a question. He's a member of parliament, and then we perhaps will take a question from maybe the bank, Premier Bank. They may have questions about the the African Economic Growth Act.
Oh yes.
You can ask questions about the U.S. commercial business ties. But also, I have a question. One of my colleagues wrote, Abdul Fatah. He said, how do you see the future of U.S. policy in Somalia in light of these opportunities and challenges you've mentioned? How do you see the future of Somalia overall, like, in light of the challenges and opportunities that you mentioned?
Some of you have heard me speak before about Somalia's full revival. As Yasir mentioned, I first came to your country in 2001. I can see, despite some of the obstacles that you're still struggling with, this drought and the plague of the violent extortion organization that is oppressing so many of your fellow Somali citizens. Despite those two obstacles, I can see tremendous progress over the last 20 years since I first came to your country, 22 years. So the entire region in terms of peace and prosperity. I was the deputy ambassador and an acting ambassador for a long time in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where we also had the responsibility as representing the United States, not as a member country, but as a international partner of the East Africa community. So I'm quite familiar with East Africa community, which of course has its headquarters in Arusha, Tanzania. I believe that after some false starts in earlier years, that Somalia will be successful and has a strong backing right now to become an East Africa community member. And given the genius of Somali businesses, I expect that that will greatly aid in the rise of this country and its full revival.
Thank you so much. I will have Malimu who has a question, and then member from will come to stage. Go ahead, Malimu.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks a lot, Mr. Ambassador, for your briefing and also responses. And first of all, I would like to thank the U.S. government for support to Somalia. You know that it has been supporting Somalia for many years, and we thank for that. We also hope that Somalia gets advantage of this, the outcome of the recent U.S.-Africa policy, Africa Leaders Summit in, and which our president was also participated. Before I put to my question, I would like to look back the history. Sorry to say that for me, I believe that U.S. foreign policy was repeatedly doing mistakes towards Somalia. We remember that 1992, when the U.S. multinational force arrived in Somalia, they came to restore hope in Somalia. But finally, after a year, the president of that time, President Bush, came to Somalia, and actually there was a famine in Somalia at that time. But in the next year, what happened? We know that there was a warlord fighting, and there was a fugitive warlord at that time. And then the next President Clinton ordered Somalia, the U.S. to evacuate from Somalia. There was an opportunity at that time, but again, U.S. abandoned Somalia for some time, and it glanced back after 9/11 or the emergence of Islamist groups and Islamic Courts Union and so on, and then they supported. But again, they did mistake because they supported Ethiopia to invade Somalia, and that also we believe it failed. For the first time, we see that U.S. is going into the right direction and supporting Somali National Army. You know, and we also see that there is a tremendous partnership with Somalia. So my question is, we want the Somali army's embargo to be lifted. So will the U.S. reconsider or revise its decision towards army's embargo in Somalia?
Excellent question.
If you go ahead and take that one.
Okay, go ahead.
A little bit on the history. When you come into our embassy, in the lobby area, you see photographs of
President Kennedy, the Somali leader, President Johnson, the Somali leader, President Nixon, President Reagan, President Bush the elder, President Bush the younger, President Obama. You see a picture of him with President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, version 1.0. And then there's a new picture we're just about to hang of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, version 2.0, with President Biden. So we have a long history of relations with your country. We have done things right, we have done things wrong. I came, well, let me back up. I mentioned earlier that I first visited your country in 2001. I was really, that was in the context of me having a regional job on environmental issues. And I was going to mainly Bosaso to look at the arrangement they had there for fisheries surveillance and monitoring and enforcement and so forth. So that was my introduction. And it was no time in 2001 to visit Mogadishu. So I had responsibility for the U.S. government on Somalia affairs in 2006 as the political counselor at U.S. Embassy Nairobi. And so amongst my responsibilities, we didn't have an embassy here. There was not even a Somalia office at Embassy Nairobi. It was really just me and one of my team members at the political section in the embassy. I came after the events that you were talking about. The Islamic Courts Union and the conflict with the warlords. That was done by the ambassador who was on his way out when I got there, and then I worked for Ambassador Ranneberger. I got there in August. The Ethiopian invasion was in December. I would not agree that we supported it because I happen to know specific things that we did, and some specific Somali individuals are well aware of what we were doing to protect key Somali leaders at that time. I probably have already said too much, but I would say it was more complicated than how you were characterizing it. But I agree that there have been times when we have been very helpful and times when we have not been. And those of us in the U.S. government who have a long experience with Africa recognize that fact. And I would say that the Somali leadership has done some things right and some things wrong, and made some serious mistakes. So, but so have foreign friends at times, including ourselves, and that's clear. We understand that amongst ourselves, and it's no secret. That was more a commentary. Remind me what the question was. Oh, arms embargo. Arms embargo. Yes, which is. I know some of the international partners are now want to call it the sanctions regime. Let me say this about that. On this government, when we have had very senior level U.S. government leaders come to Mogadishu, our Undersecretary for Political Affairs, our Undersecretary for Management Affairs, our Undersecretary, or excuse me, our USAID administrator, Samantha Power, and certainly with me, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has been very clear that that is unhelpful. Without getting myself in trouble, I will say that there were very frank discussions within the context of the UN Security Council on this question. And I would say none of the members got the resolution exactly the way they wanted it. It was a compromise. It made progress towards lifting. It's not the same as what it was before, but it wasn't a complete lifting either.
There are, one of the good things in this latest document is that it has specific criteria, benchmarks. Do this and this and this, and then lifting will occur. This government is engaged with the international partners, including the international partners who have seats on the UN Security Council, on demonstrating progress on each of those benchmarks, such that when the vote comes up next, they can say, you promised you would lift it if we did X, Y, and Z. Here's the evidence we've done X. Here's the evidence we've done Y. Here's the evidence we've done Z. Halas.
Excellent response. Okay, with closing, I think I will take the last. I'll get back to you. I'll take one more question from Honorable Sajid. He's a member of Somalia's parliament. The banks need to ask questions as well.
Okay.
And then one last. Okay, these will be the three last questions.
Okay.
Go back, Sajid.
And thank you, Mr. Ambassador, you and your American people. And we find U.S. government helping Somalia in some security aspects and some other areas, but we don't often see it providing us with educational opportunity like scholarships. So, Mr. Ambassador, can we have that opportunity during your time? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for that question, and that was a very specific and very concise question. Let me speak about my colleagues, USAID, on the education sector in general. Ongoing investments in education in Somalia have been over $71 million. 100,000 out-of-school children now have the opportunity to gain basic education through the Baarlamaanka program, which I think many people know about. That's not exactly what you were asking about, but this is trying to address the lost generation of Somali children who did not have access to education because of the situation in the country. It's actually under Ali Noor's part of the embassy, our public diplomacy, that runs our Young African Leaders program, which includes an education exchange programs, including education programs. Do you want to say anything about that, Ali Noor?
So in public diplomacy, we have opportunities whereby there is exchange programs where Somalis are enrolled in initiatives that will help them explore their capabilities. The good example is we enroll young people from Somalia into the regional leadership center in Nairobi, whereby they get a learning opportunity for them to explore their talents and also their capabilities. So there is that aspect that we deal with. We also have other exchange programs like Mandela Washington Fellow, whereby we take them to the US and have that also as experience.
I think we'll ask for exchange numbers.
Okay, I will have a question. We'll take a question from the NGO Colostrum.
Did you have from your sponsor?
Yeah, the banks. I'll text it one from the Banana University, and then the NGO. Okay, let me give you first the president of the Banana University, and he's the associate. Okay, go ahead, yes. So the banks are our team, so they can. President or
Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Excellency, Mr. Ambassador. Just I'm talking about on behalf of the chairperson of Association of Somali University. We'd like to ask you, Mr. Ambassador, what about the contribution for this partnership regarding about the higher education in Somalia? Because you know, the only program we can succeed all this turmoil in Somalia, it was the knowledge and education. What about the area they can contribute to? Also, we'd like to discuss about, to ask you about what about the strengthness in health system in Somalia? Because you know, they are very fragile state. We have no any collaboration. What about regarding in the U.S. Embassy in Somalia? Thank you very much.
Can you repeat the last point? The last point.
You know, the higher education, you know, how they can contribute in this partnership for African, you know, U.S. leading program.
Yes, we mentioned what is necessary for Somalia to take back its rightful place in the region. A strong education foundation is, including at the higher level, is absolutely crucial. However, frankly, we are concentrating our resources right now on addressing the two primary obstacles which we see, which is security and drought. And I'd say once Somalia gets past that,
Okay. Once these issues are addressed, I can think of a number of other African countries I have served in where our agenda of cooperation included education at the higher level as well. Right now, it's more limited. It's not zero, but it's not as robust as it could be. But I would be very frank and honest with you by saying that for now, we need to keep our focus on the two greatest enemies, and that is the drought and the insecurity. Get past that, and you get, when we get to the stage of Somalia making rapid progress across all sectors, which is what we are expecting a post-conflict Somalia to do, that would be a time to reorient some of the resources we're putting into the humanitarian response to the drought and to the security situation, reorient those resources to reviving sector by sector, including education, including higher education.
Excellent. I will now close with two questions. One from the, I will let you speak, Your Honorable.
I just going to add a comment regarding education. Actually, I see priority on primary education because in Somalia, we only got 23% of our children at school. So if we cannot maintain the younger generation education, how could we think and spend a lot of money, expensive money on higher education?
Thank you.
At this moment, that is where most of our education budget is going towards, is that.
Yes. We're going to close with two last questions. One from the NGO Consortium is the deputy. Go ahead. And then we're going to take a question, the final question from the banks associations.
Yes, good afternoon all. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm very glad to have you here and your team. And we have an access to ask you questions directly. I think it's okay. This one is okay. Okay. So, as you explained, Somalia is experiencing insecurity and droughts. And thanks for the relief, the 1.3 billion, of which 90% of it was cash transfer, which is accurate response. My name is Abdul Qadir Mohammed. I am the Deputy Director of Somalia NGO Consortium, an umbrella that hosts 120 NGOs, both INGOs and national NGOs. On behalf of that NGO, I'm asking you, Somalia is also a victim for climate change effects. As you're aware, throughout the cycle of the year, we are dealing with droughts and again floods. In that front, we need both climate financing and expertise as well. And Somalia, as the first time, have a specific ministry for that climate change. So I'm going to ask, what is the U.S. Embassy plan on climate change, both financing and expertise? Because we don't know. We need know-how. We are dealing with drought. I say water Somalia is a resource and it's a risk.
Yes.
So what is your plans on that? Thank you.
So, excellent question. Our government was represented at the recent climate conference, and amongst the decisions made by the climate conference was to increase climate adaptation resources for countries most affected, of which the Horn of Africa in general and Somalia in particular are among those. We're very much aware of that. Part of the answer of climate adaptation in Somalia is found in your past, by which I mean on both of your rivers, the Shabelle and the Juba, there is water management infrastructure for storage and irrigation that has not been usable for over 30 years now. It's derelict. It needs to be renovated, rehabilitated. There is no access to that water management resource because it's in Al-Shabaab controlled territory. So even something like climate adaptation has the Al-Shabaab angle to it. We know what happened when Qatar paid for a road and a Turkish company built on that road, that important infrastructure. 50 Turkish engineers lost their lives by Al-Shabaab murderers. So doing the necessary climate adaptation infrastructure, including renovating your existing infrastructure, would be possible only in a post-conflict Somalia. Your neighbor, who you share those two rivers with, Ethiopia, has water management infrastructure on both those rivers. And it continues to function, storage and irrigation up to this day. So that's, I'm not saying that's the whole answer, but that would be part of the answer. And that is amongst the major improvements in Somalia that can be achieved in a post-conflict Somalia. I've been in countries post-conflict and seen the rapid progress that can be achieved.
Okay, I would apologize to those that did not get. I would apologize. No, yes, I would apologize to those that didn't get the opportunity to ask questions. I will take the final question from the Association of Somali Banks, and I'll say that in Somali too. Marka waxaan dad badan oo su'aalo weydiiyaan fursad ma isu weyn su'aasha ugu dambaysa waxaan qaadanayaa midowga bangiyada Soomaaliyeed oo su'aal weydiin doona.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. First, I would like to thank the Mission Institute for organizing this beautiful forum, which we are discussing a very important topic. And then secondly, I would also like to thank Premier Bank for their sponsorship, because without them it would not have been possible to organize such a very good event. On today's discussion is mainly on political issues. I will go on to the economic side of the issues. As a Somali Bankers Association, now the banks are almost 18 member banks. What we are striving mostly of the time is that our banks or the financial institutions are isolated from the world or international financial institutions. Although we have done a very good development on capacitating our member banks or staff about the international standards adaptation, but we are still lacking behind and having difficulties in correspondent banks. For coming to my question, I would like to ask you, before asking about the question, I'm going to say the biggest challenge you are having is the perception issues. When we want to connect it to correspondent banks internationally, it is that Somalia is a high-risk country, or what the media is saying about Somalia all the time. What is your side of this changing the perception about Somalia? The second is that when Somalia is a dollarized economy, we are almost a state in the United States now here. What we are having a very difficult is that the inflow and outflow of cash. We are experiencing a very difficulty about sending money. Example, we always hear that it's on hold, and then nobody knows. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then the customers, and then it's very difficult scenario. Is there a perceived embargo or economic sanctions on Somalia? Okay.
The short answer to the last question was no.
Yeah.
There are no such sanctions. However, U.S. banks have a risk of if they are doing business with an entity which is then considered to be involved in money laundering or terrorist financing, then that bank gets sanctioned. So that makes the banks very, very cautious. And I'll tell you that when I was in Minneapolis, and it's not just the ethnic Somali American community in Minnesota, but that Somalia week in the first week in July, it brings together ethnic Somali American communities from across the country. That was amongst the most frequent questions I got, is what can be done to make sending home financial support for loved ones, remittances, easier, less complicated, and less expensive. All of the extra costs involved. And the lack of correspondent banking relationships plays a big role in that. So a hero of your country, I think many of you know, who the woman who runs Somalia's financial risk center, Amina, must have one of the most dangerous jobs in this country. She has a long list of enemies, and if she did not have any enemies, that would mean she was not doing her job. And I have tremendous respect for her. What is required to have a financial sector that U.S. banks are comfortable with is further progress, and there has been important progress achieved, but further progress in removing the presence of criminal activities and terror financing in the Somali financial sector. This government is doing a lot on that. Later today, I will be in a video conference with the White House and senior leaders in government on this question, exactly the question you raised, on what more can be done by the U.S. Treasury. Our Treasury attaché, who's based in Nairobi but comes up here, is involved in this, working with Somalia officials and private sector to put in place and implemented all of the reforms necessary to cleanse the financial sector. This government is putting a lot of attention on that, freezing accounts and then taking one by one, reviewing those accounts before they are unfrozen to make sure they're not associated with criminal money laundering or terror financing. That's a long drawn out process.
but it's a necessary process so that the international community of financial sector is comfortable. The introduction of 2 foreign banks, I think a lot of the domestic banks didn't like to see that, but that is actually helpful. An Egyptian bank and a Turkish bank that have international connections. Competition is a good thing, and we'll see. I'm confident there will be progress. On perceptions, again, I go back to my experience in Sierra Leone. They were famous in the 1990s when the violent anarchy was ruling in Somalia. That's when that brutal war was going on in Sierra Leone at the same time. And it took a while to overcome. Even after the war was over, it took a while before people forgot about that and saw the new reality of and how quickly they actually did recover pretty quickly until they were hit by Ebola, and then they recovered from that as well. So, but I'm saying that the way humans function, there will be a lag time between when the conflict is over and when the public perception changes. Your biggest allies are ethnic Somali Americans. I met with a group of the most successful in business, private sector success, when I was in Minneapolis. And they talked about their efforts, one, to have successful investments here, and advertising, making known to the wider American business community their successes so that it will attract others. They are doing their own efforts to educate the wider American business community about how it's possible to have successful business in this environment, even under present circumstances. And their message is, get in now rather than waiting for the rush post-conflict. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that closes our session. I want to express...
I'll say one last thing. I'm going to leave with my friend one page on AGOA. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud and his team made a big point about Somalia adhering to AGOA when they were in Washington. That process is underway, and this will give you the background on that. So I will leave that with Yasir.
Thank you. I wanted to, in closing, I wanted to thank and express my appreciations to Ambassador Andrea for willing to accept our invitation to come and speak with you. But also I wanted to thank every one of you for taking time to come here. It was really nice having all of you here. And then we will have a lunch. But before lunch, we can go take a photo group with the ambassador at that big board outside that we have. And I also wanted to mention a few media houses that were covering live for this event. I wanted to thank Shabelle TV, Universal TV, Risala Radio, SYL TV, and Somali Trade Show. Super Sign. All of them, thank you. And give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. Our session is closed. Thank you. They want to take photos with you?
Yeah, photos would be fine. I would stay for lunch, but I have other meetings I must go to.
that would be
but photos are fine.
Yeah, we have a big board outside.
Okay.
So we can...
We're going to do photos outside. Okay. Where that board is.
Mr. Ambassador?
Yeah, I don't have
I wrote your name down and I was like, I have to